Good evening, this is your host, Mr. Dark, bringing you a series of some of the most terrifying, strange, and true short horror stories of crimes, murders, abductions, and experiences. You're listening to the Dark Side Diaries podcast. The corpse of Outlaw Elmer McCurdy. The journey would take decades for Elmer McCurdy, but it wouldn't be during his 31-year lifespan of poverty, illness, and crime that was the strange one. The unbelievable mistreatment of McCurdy's corpse after his death is full of weird twists and turns, and made his afterlife so much worse. In the end, after 65 years, McCurdy's corpse would finally end up in a proper resting place, which would be longer than his actual time alive. Born in Maine on New Year's Day of 1880, McCurdy's childhood was one that would leave him unruly and rebellious as he would get older. Not knowing who his father was and being lied to by his biological mother would lead him to drink heavily as a teenager. McCurdy would become a plumber, but the economic downturn in the 1890s to the early 1900s was difficult for him to keep a job. Add in not only having his mother die, but also his grandfather, and the toll weighed heavy on him. McCurdy would leave Maine and drift around the eastern United States working as a lead miner and plumber. Struggling with holding down jobs due to his alcoholism, McCurdy joined the U.S. Army in 1907, where he was a machine gun operator and had training with nitroglycerin explosives. He'd be honorably discharged in 1910 and find his way to Kansas with an Army friend. McCurdy would find his new line of work, which would wind up being a disastrous one: robbery. Even though McCurdy had training in explosives, it was very minimal. He'd frequently miscalculate his use of explosives on bank safes, and the results were almost comedic. McCurdy and his gang attempted to rob a Pacific Express company train, and McCurdy miscalculated how much nitroglycerin to use. What resulted was a melting of some $4,000 worth of silver, melted and fused to the safe's frame. McCurdy and his gang only managed to net $450 in silver coins. Another failed attempt was the time he managed to blow a whole bank up while the safe remained untouched. In their last failed attempt, they tried to hijack a train that was supposed to have $400,000 on it, only to discover the safe was empty. McCurdy and his gang hijacked the wrong train only to get $46, 2 jugs of whiskey, an automatic revolver, a coat, and the train conductor's watch. As the gang fled up into the hills, they couldn't cover their tracks, and the authorities were ready. A sheriff's posse found McCurdy, and a shootout broke out that lasted for an hour. McCurdy was found dead with a single gunshot wound to his chest. McCurdy's strange story doesn't end there. It is after his death where the tale gets strange. When McCurdy's body left unclaimed, Joseph L. Johnson, the funeral home owner, embalmed the body with an arsenic-based preservative, which was commonly employed back in the day to keep the dead bodies intact, effectively mummifying him. Johnson stood McCurdy up in his funeral parlor and charged people money to come see him. The money was often placed in McCurdy's open mouth. But in 1916, 2 men claimed to be McCurdy's long-lost brothers and wanted to give him a decent burial and preserve his tarnished dignity. They got permission to take custody of the body and ship it to San Francisco for a proper burial. But in actuality, they were James and Charles Patterson, who ran the Great Patterson Carnival Show, a traveling carnival. McCurdy's corpse would be featured in Patterson's traveling carnival until 1922, when Patterson sold his operation to Louis Sonny and displaced the corpse in the Traveling Museum of Crime show, which featured wax replicas of famous outlaws until 1933. In 1933, director Dwayne Esper acquired McCurdy's corpse to promote his B-movie Narcotic. He used the corpse as an exhibit in the lobby of theaters as a dead dope fiend to demonstrate the dangers of drugs. Esper claimed that the skin had become hard and shriveled, causing the body to shrink and deteriorate, showing proof of the supposed dope fiend's drug abuse. In 1949, McCurdy's corpse would be placed in storage in a Los Angeles warehouse until 1964. In 1964, Lewis Sonny's son, Dan Sonny, lent the corpse to filmmaker David F. Friedman, where McCurdy's corpse made a brief appearance in Friedman's 1967 film, She Freak. It would change hands again in 1968, being sold to Hollywood Wax Museum, where McCurdy's corpse would find a temporary home at Mount Rushmore. Eventually succumbing to the elements, the corpse sustained some damage in a windstorm, where the tips of the ears and some fingers and toes were blown off. The owners of the exhibit felt the corpse looked too gruesome and not lifelike enough to display. Eventually, McCurdy's corpse would be sold to the Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach, California. It would be in 1976 where the TV series of the $6 Million Man TV show were filming scenes for the Carnival of Spies episode at the Pike. During the shoot, a prop man moved what was thought to be a wax mannequin that was hanging from a gallows. It would be McCurdy's corpse, and his arm broke off and exposed his bone and muscle tissue. With the coroner's office performing an autopsy, the body was in bad shape. Not only had it petrified and shrunk to about 50 pounds, but it was covered in wax and layers of orange fluorescent paint from all the exhibits it was a part of. After the autopsy identified McCurdy's corpse, his body was finally laid to rest in the Summit View Cemetery in Guthrie, Oklahoma. Precautions were taken to ensure that McCurdy's body wouldn't travel ever again, and concrete was poured over the casket before the gravesite was sealed. Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. It was June 5th, 1936, and two boys fishing found a rumpled pair of pants under a tree on the city's east side near East 55th Street Bridge in Cleveland. The two boys would discover tied up in the pants was a man's severed head, and the nude body would be found by nearby railroad tracks later on. The victim's cause of death was decapitation. This would be the fourth dismembered body to show up in less than a year for Cleveland police, and the victim was a John Doe, but got the nickname the Tattooed Man due to all the tattoos on his body. The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run was also known as the Cleveland Torso Murderer, and had an eerie relation to the Jack the Ripper killer, only this was in America. The killings would start in 1935, and were characterized by the dismemberment of the victims and the disposal of their remains in the poor area of Kingsbury Run. Most of the victims came from an area east of Kingsbury Run called the Roaring Third or Hobo Jungle. It was known for its bars, brothels, and gambling, and was home to many vagrants. It was September 1934 when a young man would find the lower half of a woman's torso with the thighs still attached. They were amputated at the knees and washed up on Lake Erie's shores, just east of Bretton Hall. During the initial search, very little body parts were found, but they knew the body was a female in her mid-30s. With no head, the woman was never identified. She was officially included in the killings 2 years after her find, which is why she became known as Victim Number 0, or the Lady of the Lake. Victim number 1 was a male John Doe found on September 23, 1935, located at the Jackass Hill area of Kingsbury Run. He was emasculated and decapitated, but his head was recovered. The killer treated the skin with a chemical agent that caused it to become reddish and leathery, and it would never be identified. It was later concluded he had been dead for 3 or 4 weeks. Edward Andrassy would be the second victim, and was not only killed the same day, but was only 30 feet from the first victim. He too was emasculated, decapitated, and the head recovered. Police were able to identify Andrassy due to his fingerprints being from prior arrests. Months would pass until another victim would turn up in January 1936, when a woman would discover half the body of a female victim neatly wrapped in newspaper and packed in 2 half-bushel baskets. The baskets with the body parts were left near the Hart Manufacturing Building on Central Avenue. Almost all the body except for the head was recovered, around 10 days later in a vacant lot of nearby Orange Avenue. Fingerprints would allow the victim to be identified as Florence Polillo. She was a waitress, barmaid, and prostitute that lived right on the edge of the Roaring Third, with the fourth victim being the tattooed man, murdered in June 1936. The fifth victim would be found in July 1936, about a month after. A teenage girl walking through the woods near the Big Creek area of Brooklyn, west of Cleveland, came across the decapitated remains of a 40-year-old white male. With the head and a pile of bloody clothing nearby, the victim had been dead about 2 months. With the amount of blood found seeped in the ground at the crime scene, apparently he had been killed where his body was found. With the victim being unidentified, he would be John Doe number 3. With the summer still going, victims 6 and 7 would bring more gruesome murders. Victim 6, or John Doe number 4, was found as an upper half of a torso and decapitated. The victim was a 22-year-old male, and over 600 onlookers would watch as police would pull the bottom half of the torso found in an open sewer. With victim 7, it was a female, and wouldn't be found until 1 year after her murder in 1937. She was called Jane Doe number 2, and like the other victims, her body was decapitated and the head was recovered. With 7 brutal murders in 1 year, and mounting pressure from Mayor Harold Burton, recently appointed safety director Elliot Ness would get more involved in the case. This would be the biggest police investigation in Cleveland history. With no new evidence, the killer would strike again, February 23, 1937, with a woman's top half torso being found in the same spot as victim number 0. She was unable to be identified, and her lower half of the torso washed ashore 3 months later. In July 1937, the National Guard found victim number 9, or John Doe number 5. Over a few days, police recovered the entire body, except for the head, from the waters of the Cuyahoga River. The victim's abdomen had been gutted and his heart ripped out. Almost a year would go by until victim number 10, in April 1938, when part of a woman's leg was found on the banks of the river. A month later, police would pull 2 burlap bags out of the river, containing both parts of the torso and more parts of both legs. Police no closer to finding the killer, victims 11 and 12 would show up on August 16, 1938. Scrap collectors were foraging a dump site and found the torso of a woman wrapped in fabric. While searching for more body parts, the police discovered the remains of a second body only yards away. Police believe the 2 bodies had been put here due to Elliot Ness's office window having a view of the location, almost as if taunting him. In late 1938, the Cleveland police received a letter purportedly from the killer. It stated, "You can rest easy now. I have come out to sunny California for the winter." The killer had claimed to have killed someone and buried their body on Century Boulevard between Crenshaw and Western in Los Angeles, but no body was ever found. The official number of murders attributed to the Cleveland torso murderer is 12, although recent research has shown there could have been as many as 20. The 12 known victims were killed between 1935 and 1938. Some investigators, including lead Cleveland detective Peter Marilow, believe that there may have been 20 or more victims. The killer, after the murders had stopped, continued to taunt Ness for years afterwards. One thing is very certain: the Kingsbury Run murders remain one of the strangest cases in United States criminal history. This concludes our episode of the Dark Side Diaries. Please remember to follow, like, share, and subscribe for future episodes.